Hi guys, it's Jill. I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed this week. How are you? Um, so I have notes for this video on symbolic interpretation, symbolism and culture, and I'm going to use them. This is such a cool week. So this week we're starting to get really trippy. Symbolic anthropology, culture and interpretation. Clifford Garrett's. He's one of my favorites. He is an anthropologist who started writing and working, well, who was producing a lot of his research in the 1960s. And so his sort of understanding of culture and people is of the organization of diversity, right? Meaning that like you don't define a culture by a group of people who are all the same, right? The goal of culture is not to replicate, or culture as an institution doesn't work. A society doesn't work by replicating uniformity, meaning producing individuals who are the same, generation after generation, which is one model. But Geertz's model, and this is the one that I think is, more compelling, more interesting, looks at how different people, right, with different experiences, different understandings, different biologies, different psychological makeups, are organized into a collective, right, that is recognizable by the individuals within it. It's cool. It's cool. You think you know about symbols, but you don't know about symbols. All right. So Clifford Garrett's big guy, important. So is Victor Turner. We're going to be talking about all of them. So, up until like the 1970s, a little history. Until the 1970s, right? Anthropologists were looking at things and asking questions about culture or society that really stressed how societies functioned as a whole, how structures are maintained, and how like institutions maintain themselves. How do cultural forms continue to exist generation after generation? Which, I mean, that's a very interesting question to me. There were popular models and theories that tended to look at culture or society as like an organism, meaning a life form with different parts, like parts of our body, like our body systems that were interrelated and that functioned and supported each other, like all the systems in our bodies do to maintain the life that is. You dig? So like I am an organism. Metaphorically, I would be culture. All of the different parts of my body systems are also an integrated, right, holistic system, and support the ongoing life of the organism that is me. The issue though there, I mean, that's cool. That is cool. But I mean, so what you're looking at, if you're interested in that, you're looking at how things stay the same, right? And like, I don't know, maybe I've always been a little wild, rebellious. I like to know how things change, right? I start from an assumption of like, we are not all the same. We see things differently. Like, I don't understand most people I meet, regardless of like whether we grew up next door to each other, speak the same language, have the same. I'm like, I don't understand anybody. That's why I'm an anthropologist. So anyway, Clifford Geertz and other anthropologists that were working around his time in like the 1960s started to ask different questions, questions that focused on like individuals and how individuals can be integrated into a cultural or social group. So it's not that all these people are the same, right? But rather we're all different. How do we become a collective? How does culture organize that difference in a way that provides for the maintenance of this larger institution that is culture? Isn't that a cool question? So, okay. You know, he's thinking about things like how values and ideas about like norms, ways of being become internalized and internalized to like such an extent in so many different people who with, you know, different experiences and perspectives that we can still all sort of recognize this common symbol and it holds us together. So things are the same, but they're different. But they're different and the same, and they all mean something. Okay, so here's like the first thing you have to do in order to get like symbolic interpretation and to understand how symbols can help us understand how culture works, right? And help us understand culture more deeply, is we have to work to separate in our minds things and our understanding of things, right? What something is and how we relate to it. Objective, concrete, material like data, anthropology is empirical, right? Objective means it can be observed through the five senses. So things I can see, hear, feel, taste. I don't know, there's other senses. Objective, subjective. Our perspective on an object, a thing, an event, a behavior, right? So there's what happens, what it is, a practice, and then there's how we understand it, our perspective on it, and how we think it relates to the whole. This sounds simple. This is very difficult for us to do. I mean, this is unconscious bias, right? We conflate the two. Been looking at like this stuff, right? And when we look at stuff, we've been looking at objects, at artifacts, sort of things, and like things are things. Things are things. But what culture does is culture gives meaning to those things. And it creates a relationship between things. Okay, so the first thing we have to do, we have to understand like what a symbol is, right? We talk about like symbolism in English class. A symbol basically is something that stands for something else, right? So the American flag, right, is an object. It is not actually the United States of America. It is not like the political geography. It is not, you know, the government or it's like people, but it represents the United States of America. And so what that means is that like symbolism is all about relationships. We create symbols by putting two things into a relationship with one another. And those things have relationships to other things and other institutions, people, places, right? Economic situations, all of these things. Culture is an integrated system where all of the parts relate to one another in part because of, you know, this sort of web of relationships. Symbolism and symbolic interpretation, right, looks at those relationships. Things are things, okay? but they also represent other things. And in order to understand a culture, we need to look at both of these aspects.